8 men. 8 horses breathing steam into an October morning, and 8 hands resting near their belts, the particular way men rest their hands when they want you to see exactly where those hands are. In the middle of the yard, one woman. A brown dress washed so many times the color gave up. A few strands of hair loose in the wind. She doesn't bother fixing them. She doesn't step back. 18 hours ago, she was selling eggs at the Friday market. The west wind drags across the fence line, dry and thin as a blade. Behind the barn something clicks small, metal on metal. A horse throws its head and stamps down into the red clay. Nobody speaks, nobody needs to. She looks at those 8 men the way you look at weather coming in from the west, not afraid of it, not glad, just doing the arithmetic of what it's going to cost her. Then her hand begins to move. 8 men. That was what she counted. Standing in a loose half-circle across the yard, their horses breathing steam into the cold morning air, their hands resting near their belts the way men do when they want you to notice where their hands are. 8 men. And one woman. The woman was small, 5'3", maybe, wearing a plain brown dress that had been washed so many times the color had given up trying. Her dark auburn hair was pinned back, but a few strands had come loose in the wind. She hadn't bothered fixing them. She didn't look like much. That was the problem. That was always the problem with Wren Holt. She stood in the middle of her own yard, in front of her own house, on her own land, and she looked at those 8 men the way you look at weather coming in from the west. Not afraid of it, not happy about it, just reading it, deciding what it means and what it costs, and whether you need to move or whether you can just stand there and let it pass over you. Her name was Wren Holt, and 18 hours ago she had been selling eggs at the Friday market. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of that morning. The real beginning. The beginning that explains why a woman who looked like she had no business, standing in front of 8 armed men, stood there anyway. Didn't flinch. Didn't run. Didn't say a word. Because some endings only make sense once you understand the ground they grew out of. And this story grew out of very particular ground. West Texas ground. Red clay and pale limestone, and a sky so wide it makes you feel like the whole world is just this flat, sun-hammered place stretching out in all directions forever. Harrow Bend sat in the middle of that nothing, huddled up against a dry creek bed, a few hundred people, trying to make a town out of dust and stubbornness and not much else. The year was 1884. The month was October. And the morning Wren Holt walked into town to sell her eggs was the morning everything changed. She just didn't know it yet. She almost never did. The tray held 32 eggs, nested in straw, wrapped in a cloth she'd dampened at the pump before dawn. She carried it balanced in both hands, moving through the Friday market, the way she always moved through Harrow Bend, quietly, on the edges, not drawing attention. She was good at not drawing attention. Wren Holt had spent the better part of a year perfecting it. The market was the usual organized confusion. Farmers with wagons, women with baskets, children chasing each other between the stalls while their mothers called after them, without looking up. The smell of fresh bread from the Kessler bakery at the far end of the street, mixing with horse and hay and wood smoke and the particular tang of autumn, coming in dry and early. It was a good market morning, the kind where everything feels almost all right. She sold 14 eggs to Marta Ewan, who ran the boarding house on Crail Street and always bought in batches. Sold 8 more to a young couple she didn't know by name, just by face. They were new to the county, had that look that newcomers get when they're still surprised. The land is as brutal as people warned them it would be. They'd lose that look in a year. Most people did. Either they got harder or they got gone. She had 6 eggs left. She was heading to old Emmett Farr's general store because Emmett always bought whatever she had left over. Not because he needed them, because he'd known her father-in-law, and he was the kind of man who turned loyalty into habit and habit into principle and just kept going. She was almost there. That was when it happened. The boardwalk outside the land office was elevated 6 inches above the street level. Rough-cut pine planks, gray with age, the kind of wood that went soft in wet weather and hard as iron in dry spells. There were 4 people already walking on it. 2 men headed south, a woman with a market basket moving north, and Wren, stepping up off the street with her egg tray and her dampened cloth and her 6 remaining eggs. She saw the man coming. Of course she saw him. She'd learned to see things like that early, real early. When your father is the kind of man Cal Holt was, you learn to read space, to understand bodies in motion, to notice when something is moving toward you, with intent versus moving toward you by accident. This was not accident. Big man, broad across the chest, hat pulled low. The kind of walk that people confuse with confidence, but is actually just aggression with somewhere to go. His name was Dill Tasker. He worked for Amos Drury's ranch operations, and he did not move to give her room. She could have stepped aside. That was the calculation she made in the 3 seconds before impact. Step aside. Let him pass. Keep the eggs safe. Keep the peace. Keep doing what she'd been doing for 9 months, which was keeping her head down and her mouth shut and her grief folded up small and stored somewhere. It couldn't slow her down. She could have stepped aside. She didn't, not because she was stupid, not because she wanted trouble, because she was on a public boardwalk with a legal right-of-way, carrying goods she'd produced on land that was still, as of that morning, legally hers. And the day she started stepping aside for men like Dill Tasker on public boardwalks was the day she might as well deed the whole 280 acres over to Amos Drury and start walking. So she held her line, and he hit her shoulder with his, hard enough that it wasn't an accident, hard enough that it was a message. And she went sideways, and the tray tilted, and the eggs went into the street in a slow, terrible arc, each one finding the ground in its own way, some cracking clean, some shattering, the yolk spreading out on the packed clay like something that had been waiting to spill. She caught herself on the post at the edge of the boardwalk. Didn't fall. Barely. Her hand gripped the wood hard enough that she felt the splinters before she felt the pain. Tasker kept walking. He didn't look back, didn't say excuse me, didn't say sorry, didn't acknowledge that anything had happened at all, just kept walking, broad shoulders moving easy, like he'd barely noticed, like she was a fence post he'd brushed against, like she was nothing on this street, in this town, in this county, except an inconvenience he'd already forgotten. The market kept moving. That was the part she'd remember longest, not Tasker, not the eggs. The market keeping moving, people who'd seen it happen, people who'd heard the crack of the shells and looked over, and seen a woman alone on a boardwalk with an empty tray and yoke on the street, and turned back to their business. All of them, every last one. She stood there for a moment, just a moment, the kind where you're doing arithmetic that has nothing to do with numbers, where you're counting things that don't have names, the weight of 9 months pressing against the backs of her eyes, the knowledge that this wasn't about eggs, the understanding, sudden and cold and very clear, that this was going to keep happening, that it had been arranged to keep happening, that men like Tasker didn't walk into women on boardwalks by accident when those women owned land that someone else wanted. She'd been selling eggs, being quiet, being careful, being the kind of widow that small towns approve of, the kind who keeps to herself and works hard and doesn't make anyone uncomfortable with her grief or her situation or the fact that she's alone and the land is worth more than anyone had let on, and it hadn't been enough. It was never going to be enough. She set the empty tray carefully against the boardwalk post, looked at the ruined eggs in the street, looked at Tasker's back 50 yards away now, disappearing around the corner, looked at the people who had not moved, the people who were not looking at her, and she made a decision. Not the loud kind, not the kind you announce, the quiet kind, the kind that happens somewhere below the throat, in the chest, in the place where you keep the things you're actually made of. She picked up the empty tray, walked to Emmett Farr's general store, pushed open the door. Emmett Farr was 71 years old and had been running that store since before Harrow Bend had a name. He was the kind of man who'd weathered so many things for so long that he'd stopped being surprised by any of them, which gave him a stillness that people sometimes mistook for slowness. He wasn't slow. He saw her come through the door, and his face did something complicated. Not surprise, not pity. Something more like resignation mixed with sorrow, mixed with a very specific kind of anger that old men get when they've been watching the world do something wrong for a long time and can see it's not finished. He went to the back without a word. She waited. The store smelled of tobacco and dried herbs and the particular dusty sweetness of bulk flour sitting in open sacks. A clock on the wall behind the counter ticked with the mechanical patience of something that had outlasted many human concerns. He came back carrying a wooden box, small enough to hold in both hands, dark with age. The lid fitted tight. There was a small brass lock on the front, the kind that takes a specific key, a key she had never seen. But she recognized the box. She'd seen it once, maybe twice, in her life. It had sat on a shelf in her father-in-law's house, high up, out of the way, the kind of place where things go when they're not ready to be found. Emmett set it on the counter between them. "Leland left this with me," he said. His voice was the voice of a man who'd been rehearsing this moment for a while and was still not sure he was ready for it. "Before he died, he said to give it to you when someone started pushing." His words. When someone starts pushing. She looked at the box, not at Emmett, the box. "He knew," she said. It wasn't a question. He suspected. Emmett's jaw tightened. "You're Leland?" "Yes," she said. "He was." She picked up the box. "There's a key underneath the lid," Emmett said. "Taped to the wood. He taped it himself." She nodded. "Wren." His voice had changed. Lower now. The way voices go, when they want to be sure something is heard. "Whatever's in there, whatever Leland knew or thought he knew, you be careful with it. You understand me? Drury's not a man who—" "Thank you, Emmett." She said it, the way her father had taught her to say, things that meant the conversation was finished. Not rude, not cold, just decided. She took the box and walked out of the store. She did not open it in town. That was important. Whatever was in that box was hers. Private meant for her eyes in her space in her time. Not to be cracked open on a public street while the Friday market hummed around her. Not to be read with Emmett's worried eyes on her back, or Tasker somewhere around the next corner, or whoever else Drury had watching the movements of the widow on the Holt place. And someone was watching. She knew that now, had probably known it for a while, the way you know things that you're not ready to know. The way knowledge sits in the body before it makes it to the mind. She rode home. The road from Harrow Bend to the Holt farm was 4 miles of packed clay that turned to red mud in rain and concrete in heat, and somewhere in between in October. She rode it in under 40 minutes, which was faster than she usually rode, though she wasn't galloping. It was a thinking pace. That was all. The kind where the horse knows where it's going, and the rider is somewhere else entirely. The Holt farm was 280 acres of West Texas land that her father-in-law, Douglas Holt, had homesteaded under the Homestead Act of 1862, back when this part of the country was being handed out to anyone willing to work it. Douglas had worked it. His son Leland had worked it alongside him from the time he could hold a hoe. They'd built the house together, the barn, the fence lines, the cattle pens. Everything else that made 280 acres into something that qualified as a life. Douglas died in 1880. Leland married Wren in 1881. Leland died 9 months ago. Now it was hers. Legally, clearly, documented hers. The deed was in Austin with the land commissioner. Her name was on it. The land was hers, the same way this sky was hers. The same way the red clay on her boots was hers. The same way the cold October wind finding the gap in the barn roof was hers. And someone wanted to take it. She had known that for a while, too. In the abstract, the way you know a storm is coming, because you've been smelling the change in the air for days. The visits from Roy Fitch at Drury's bank. The paperwork. The loans. The language in the letters that was always just a little too formal, a little too precise. The kind of careful legal phrasing that means someone is building a case one document at a time. But now she had a box. Augusto was in the east pasture when she got back. She could see him out there from the gate, a compact figure moving steadily through the grass, checking the fence line the way he'd been checking fence lines on this property for going on 20 years. He'd worked for Douglas first, then for Leland, now for her. 58 years old, quiet, methodical. He had a way of moving through the work that had nothing to do with hurry and everything to do with getting it right the first time, so you didn't have to do it again. He glanced up when she came through the gate, read her face the way he always read her face, which was to say completely and without drama. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. She went inside. The house was plain. 2 rooms downstairs, a sleeping loft, a kitchen that was also a sitting room in the way that small houses negotiate their own space. The furniture was mostly Douglas's. Heavy, practical, built to last. A rocking chair by the window that had been Leland's, the wood worn smooth at the arms from years of his hands. She sat at the kitchen table, set the box in front of her, found the key where Emmett said it would be, a small thing, iron, taped to the underside of the lid, with a strip of cloth. She worked it free, unlocked the box. Inside, first, an envelope sealed, her name written on the front in Leland's handwriting. She knew his handwriting very well, had loved his handwriting. The particular way he wrote his W's, always a little crooked, always a little uncertain at the peak, like the letter was asking a question. Second, a folded piece of paper, unlined with lines and marks on it that she recognized as a rough map. The compass rose in the corner, a marking of the property boundary, an X, southwest corner. Third, a small piece of torn paper, a scrap of something larger. On it, numbers and a date and a partial name. She opened the letter first. Leland's handwriting. Leland's words. She read them twice. Then a third time. The way you read things that change the shape of everything around you, needing the repetition to make them real. Wren, if you're reading this, something happened. And if Emmett gave you this box, it's because something started. I want you to know first that I'm sorry. I should have told you. I kept thinking I was wrong, that I was seeing shadows that weren't there. A man gets tired and starts imagining enemies. I kept telling myself that. I was not wrong. Drury paid someone to come to the farm. I don't know who. I caught one of his men measuring the southwest fence line 3 weeks ago. Tuesday, I think, before sunup. He said he was lost. He had drafting tools in his saddlebag. Men who are lost don't carry drafting tools. The money I found, the receipt, it's in the box. I found it in the dirt near the south water pump. I think it fell out of someone's pocket. It's dated 3 days before the date. I'm writing this letter. I don't know what that means exactly, but the name on it is in Drury's handwriting, and the amount is $250. The map is of our southwest corner. I didn't make it. I found it already here when I inherited this land from my father, tucked into the back of his ledger book. My father never talked about it. I don't know what he knew. But whatever is under that corner, Wren, whatever is down there, it's why they want the land, not the land itself. What's in it? You are the most capable person I have ever known. You are also the most stubborn, which in this case might be the same thing. Don't let them have it. I love you. I always did. From the first morning I ever saw you. L. She sat with the letter for a long time. The kitchen was quiet around her. The clock on the mantel, the wind in the eaves, the distant sound of a gusto moving in the yard, the slow, systematic sound of work being done by someone who intended to keep doing it, as long as there was work left to do. She did not cry. She had done her crying. 9 months of it, in pieces in the hours before dawn, when the house was so empty it made a sound. She was not unfeeling. She was not hard. She was something else, something she'd been becoming for a while. She was running out of room for grief. There was too much else to carry. She picked up the map. The map was drawn on paper that had yellowed at the edges. Not recent. This wasn't Leland's drawing. He'd said so in the letter, and she could see it anyway. The hand was different. Steadier. More practiced. Someone who drew maps, the way other people wrote sentences. Easily, automatically. The way you do things when you've done them 10,000 times. The property lines matched. She recognized the creek bed, the fence corners, the barn's position relative to the house. The X was in the southwest corner, right where a slight depression in the land had always made the ground feel hollow underfoot. She'd noticed it as a girl, visiting the farm before she and Leland married. Had asked about it. Leland had shrugged, said his father said it was just where an old well had caved in, said it wasn't worth worrying about. She looked at the compass rose in the corner of the map, and stopped. Her chest did a particular thing, a tightening, followed by a release, followed by something she couldn't name. The compass rose. She knew that compass rose. Not because it was standard. It wasn't standard. The north needle had a small notch cut into the right side, a specific detail that wasn't decorative, that was a marker, an identifier. And the E for east had a tiny secondary mark beneath it, just a line, barely visible. Her father had drawn maps like this. She had sat beside him at the table in the house they'd shared when she was 8 years old and 9 years old and 10 years old, and she had watched him draw maps, and he had explained to her how he marked his work so he'd know his own maps in the field, so there was no confusion if a map got separated from its owner. The notch in the north needle, the mark under the E. She was holding a map drawn by her father. Cal Holt had known about the southwest corner of this land. Cal Holt had been on this land, had measured it, had made this map, and had not told her. Had not told Leland. Had tucked the map into the back of a ledger book and left it there. Why? Why would her father make a map of her father-in-law's property and not say a word? She turned the map over. On the back, in the bottom right corner, very small, 2 words in her father's hand. Tell no one. She sat there until the light changed. The afternoon moved through the window in its slow West Texas way, the shadows going long, the color of the sky sliding from hard blue toward the softer golds of evening. She sat with the map and the letter and the scrap of receipt paper and tried to make them into a shape she could understand. What she knew, Leland was dead. Not from a fall down a well. Someone had been paid $250 3 days before his death. The receipt was in the box. The name on it, in Drury handwriting. $250 was not a small amount. It was not a coincidence. What she suspected, the southwest corner held something valuable, something underground, something worth enough that a man like Amos Drury, careful, methodical, patient Amos Drury, had decided it was worth killing for. What she could not explain her father. Cal Holt, who had been on this land before she ever was, who had mapped that corner, who had written "Tell no one" on the back, and tucked it away and taken whatever he knew to his grave without a word. Her father, who had known things he never talked about. Her father, who had taught her to shoot a pistol when she was 8 years old, and a rifle when she was 9, and who had said, more than once, in more than one way, "I'm teaching you this, because the world isn't going to treat you gently, and I want you to have a say in how things go." She'd thought it was a general principle. She was beginning to wonder if it was something more specific. Augusto knocked on the door at dusk. She called him in. He stepped inside, looked at the table, looked at her, looked at the box, and its contents spread across the wood in the fading light. "Trouble," he said. It was not a question. "Trouble," she agreed. He nodded, moved to the stove, which had gone cold while she'd been sitting there, and began building a fire in it, with the methodical patience he brought to everything. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't offer opinion. When the fire was going, he put water on for coffee. "Tasker," he said, from the stove, not looking at her. "Yes, he's done that before, to the Lindqvist woman, and to Preacher Hoag's wife. Before those people sold, she looked at him, you knew. I saw." He turned then. His face was the face of a man who has absorbed many difficult things over many years and carries them quietly because there's nowhere else to put them. "I should have told you sooner. I thought maybe it wouldn't come to this. It came to this." "Yes." A pause. "What will you do?" She looked at the map, at the letter, at the torn receipt. "I don't know yet," she said, which was the honest answer. "But I'm done selling eggs and hoping it goes away." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father," he said, not looking at her, stirring coffee. "He was a good man. He was a complicated man." "Yes, but good underneath the complicated parts." She thought about the compass rose, the notch in the north needle. "Tell no one." "Augusto," she said, "did my father ever come to this farm?" When you worked for Douglas? A pause, longer than it needed to be. Once, he said. Maybe twice. What did he do when he was here? Another pause. He walked the fence lines, Augusto said carefully. He and Douglas walked the fence lines together. For 2 days. I don't know what they talked about. I was told to stay at the barn. She absorbed that. Told to stay at the barn. Her father and Douglas Holt, walking fence lines together for 2 days in private, talking about things they wouldn't let anyone else hear. Thank you, she said. He set a cup of coffee in front of her. Black, the way she took it. He'd been making her coffee for 9 months, and he'd gotten it right the first time. He went back to his quarters above the barn without being asked. He had a sense for when she needed to be alone with a problem. She sat with her coffee and the box and the particular silence of a house where someone used to live who didn't anymore. She opened the Colt that night. It was in its own box, separate from everything else, stored under the loose board beside her bed. She'd known it was there since Leland died. She'd walked over that board every day for 9 months. She'd made a deliberate decision, in those first terrible weeks, to leave it where it was. She didn't trust herself. Not then. Grief does things to judgment, and a woman with ruined judgment and a loaded 0.45 is a danger to herself and everyone near her and the future she's supposed to have. So she'd left it, but she hadn't forgotten about it. She lifted the board, set it aside, reached into the dark and brought the box up into the lamplight. Her father's Colt single-action army, 0.45 caliber, the Peacemaker, made in 1873, purchased in Fort Worth, carried for years by a Texas Ranger who'd used it in the line of duty more times than he'd ever told her, and fewer times than the stories said. When Cal Holt died, this was what he left her. Not just the gun, not just the mechanism, the promise of it, the accumulated knowledge of how to use it properly, correctly, precisely, without waste. Years of mornings behind the house in whatever county they'd been living in, the two of them, father and daughter, tin cans and fence posts and the patience of practice. She checked the action. Smooth. Still smooth. She'd cleaned it a year ago, when she'd first stored it, and nothing had gotten into the mechanism since. She loaded it. 6 rounds, 0.45 caliber shells, clean and well seated. She set it on the table beside the lamp, looked at it. The gun looked back. She didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel brave. She felt, if she was being honest, like a woman who was very tired and very angry and very afraid, and who had run out of other options, and who was trying to figure out what came next. But she felt clearer than she had all day, clearer than she'd felt in 9 months. There was something about making a decision that did that. Even a hard one. Even a frightening one. The uncertainty was the worst part. The deciding was almost a relief. She was not going to sell. She was not going to sign anything. She was not going to step off boardwalks to make room for men like Dill Tasker. She was going to find out what was under the southwest corner of her land, and she was going to find out who had paid $250 3 days before her husband died, and she was going to understand what her father had known and why he'd kept it from her, and then she was going to do something about it. All of it. She didn't know how yet, but she'd start with what she had. She always had. She woke before 4. She always woke before 4. That hadn't changed. The body keeps its schedule even when everything else falls apart. She dressed in the dark, moving quietly through the house, and went outside. October morning. Cold and still and very dark. The stars laid out across the sky, the way they get only in places where there's no competing light. She stood in the yard for a moment and just looked up at it. The Milky Way. She'd grown up under skies like this. You don't take them for granted when you've had them your whole life. You just learn to forget about them between occasions, and then they catch you off guard all over again. She went around to the back of the barn, away from the house, away from the window where Augusto slept above, out of sight of the road. She paced off 20 yards, set up 6 tin cans on the fence rail, each about 6 inches apart, went back to her mark, stood there. The cold was seeping through her jacket, finding her wrists, her collar. She could see her breath. She raised the Colt. Her father's voice. Not a memory, exactly. More like a presence. The way the knowledge of a person stays in the body even after the person is gone. Breathe, get your sight picture. Don't force it. Let the gun find the target. She breathed, she fired. The gun spoke once, and the first can went off the rail. She breathed. The second. Third. Fourth, fifth. She lowered the Colt on the sixth. Made herself wait, counted to 3. Made the decision again in real time, deliberately fired. 6 cans, 6 shots, 6 hits. The sound of the shots rolled out across the open land and disappeared into the dark. There was nobody for a mile and a half in any direction, nobody to hear. She stood in the dark with the gun at her side. Not proud exactly. Relieved. That was closer to it. Relieved that it was still there. The thing her father had given her. The knowledge that lived in her hands and her breathing and her eye, the thing that no one could take away because it wasn't property, it wasn't paper, it wasn't something that could be foreclosed on, or transferred, or stolen. It was hers. She reloaded, went back inside, made coffee, sat at the table and looked at the map as the sun came up. At first light she walked the south pasture, following the fence line west, and then south, her boots finding the ground the way feet do when they know the particular irregularities of a particular place. She'd walked this fence 100 times. She knew where it dipped, where the posts had settled, where Leland had replaced 3 rails 4 summers ago after a storm knocked through. She was heading for the southwest corner, the X on the map. It took her 20 minutes to reach it. The land changed slightly as she got there, in a way she'd always noticed without really thinking about. The grass grew different, lower, paler, the kind of thing you see in places where something underground is affecting the soil conditions, and the ground itself. You could feel it if you walked slowly enough. A faint give. Almost nothing. But there, she stopped at the corner post. The depression she remembered was there, oval-shaped, maybe 12 feet across at its widest point. The soil in it was a different color than the surrounding ground, grayer, with a slight bluish cast in certain light. She crouched down, picked up a handful of soil, rubbed it between her fingers. She wasn't a mining engineer. She wasn't a geologist. She'd grown up on ranching land, and she knew good grazing soil and bad grazing soil, and the kind of soil that holds water and the kind that doesn't. But she knew this wasn't any of those things. This was something else. She set the soil down carefully, stood up, looked at the X on the map, then at the ground under her feet. Whatever was here, it was real. Leland had suspected it. Her father had known it. And Amos Drury had sent a man with drafting tools to measure this fence line before sunup on a Tuesday morning. She needed help. That was the thing she was least comfortable with, needing help. Not because she was too proud. She'd gotten past that particular brand of pride around the time she was 12, and her father had explained, with characteristic directness, that pride was just fear wearing nicer clothes. Not because she didn't trust anyone. Because trust was a resource, and like any resource, you spent it carefully when you didn't have much. She needed someone who knew law, the kind of law that was written in books, the kind that protected land and documented claims and meant something to a commissioner in Austin. She needed someone who knew tactics, the real kind, the kind that came from years of doing difficult things in difficult places. She needed someone who knew this particular county's particular ground. She was still thinking about exactly what and who and how when she heard the horse. Not on the road, coming through the east field, which meant someone who knew the property layout and wasn't coming from the direction of town. She turned back toward the house without rushing, because rushing told people things you didn't necessarily want them to know. By the time she reached the barnyard, the rider had come through the east gate and stopped in the yard. He was old, that was the first thing. Old and large, which is a combination that strikes you differently than young. And large because there's a history to it, a sense of something having been tested many times. He sat on a bay horse, like a man who'd been sitting on horses his whole life and stopped finding it remarkable. White hair, white beard, both needing attention. A coat that had been good quality once 20 years ago. Boots that were worn down at the heels but clean, and a Winchester model, 1873 in the saddle scabbard. He looked at her. She looked at him. He had eyes that made you feel like being looked at meant something. The kind of eyes that had seen enough things that they'd stopped performing surprise at new information. "You're Cal's girl," he said, not a question. "I'm Cal's daughter," she said. "Who are you?" Something moved in his face. Almost something else. "Gibbs Farnell," he said. "U.S. Marshal. Retired. What do you want, Mr. Farnell?" Heard the Holt place was having some trouble. He looked around the yard, slow and thorough, the way a man does when he's assessing and doesn't care if you know it. "Came to see for myself." "Who told you that?" "Emmett Farr sent me a wire." "Emmett, of course." She studied the man, the horse, the Winchester, the eyes. "When did you know my father?" she asked. He took his time with that, like the question deserved real consideration. "Long time," he said finally. "Going on 30 years. Off and on." A pause. He was a hard man to know. But worth the effort, she considered that. "Dismount," she said. "I'll make coffee." He sat at her kitchen table and drank his coffee black, which told her something. Old lawmen and old cowboys drank their coffee black. It was a practical habit from decades of drinking whatever was available in whatever conditions existed, and after enough of that, you stopped caring about additions. He looked at the box on the table. Didn't ask. She appreciated that. "How long have you known there was trouble on this property?" she asked. "Suspected, maybe 2 years." He set his cup down. "New, 3 months. I've been watching Amos Drury for a while. He's been acquiring land on this side of the county in a pattern that doesn't make ranching sense. Too specific, too concentrated around one area, this general direction." "Yes." She looked at him. "Why does it not make ranching sense?" He laced his hands around the cup. "Because a rancher buys land for grazing, and what he's been buying doesn't have enough water. And he's been buying it at prices that don't make sense for grazing land." A pause. "But they'd make a lot of sense for something else. What do you know about the southwest corner?" He looked at her steadily. "What do you know about it?" She showed him the map. He looked at it for a long time. Not at the property lines. At the compass rose. And she watched his face carefully. And she saw the moment he saw it, the same way she'd seen it. The notch in the north needle. The mark under the E. He sat back in his chair. "Yes, Cal drew this map." "That's right." He was quiet, processing something. Something that went back farther than she could see. "He never told you," she said. "No." Farnell's voice had changed. Quieter. More internal, like he was talking to himself as much as to her. "He wouldn't have." Cal held things close. Always did. He treated information like ammunition. You don't leave ammunition lying around. "What did he know about this land?" "Rent, don't." Her voice was even, final. The way her father's voice had been final, when it needed to be. "Don't manage me, don't decide what I can handle. Whatever you know, I need to hear it." He held her gaze. Then he said, "There's copper under that ground." She sat very still. "How much?" "Enough." Cal found signs of it in 1879, when he was ranging through this area on a separate case. He told your father-in-law, Douglas. They agreed to keep quiet about it. Southern Pacific was already planning their western expansion at that point. If word got out that this section of land had copper under it and the railroad was coming through, he spread his hands. Things would have gotten complicated. So they said nothing. They said nothing. Cal mapped it, filed the map away, and they hoped the railroad would route differently. He paused. It didn't. She looked at the map, at her father's handwriting. "Tell no one." "When did Drury find out?" she said. "I don't know. Sometime in the last 3 years. Maybe he had his own surveyors come through. Maybe someone talked who shouldn't have." Farnell's jaw tightened. But once he knew, he started buying everything around it, getting positioned. And when he couldn't get this piece by buying it, he found another way. The word hung in the air between them. Not said. Not needed. Leland, $250. 3 days before the well. She set her hands flat on the table, not shaking. Very still. The way still water is still, because everything underneath it is moving, but it's moving together in one direction. "I need to know what's legally possible," she said. If Drury tries to take this land, what can he actually do? What can I actually do? That's a question for someone who knows the law better than me. He paused, but I know some things. And I know who you need to talk to. And I know I owe your father a debt I can't pay to him. So, she looked at him. So she said. He picked up his coffee. Your father told me once, he said. The only reason he taught you to shoot was so you'd know the difference between having to use it and choosing not to. He looked back at her. That distinction was important to him. He explained that to me too, she said. When I was 12. Did you understand it then? Not completely. Do you understand it now? She looked at the Colt on the table beside the lamp. I'm working on it, she said. That night, after Farnell had eaten the meal Augusto brought and had settled into the spare room that had been Douglas's study, after the yard was dark and the horses were quiet and the October wind was doing its lonely work in the eaves, she went outside again. Not to the back of the barn, to the southwest corner. She stood in the dark over the hollow place in the ground, where the soil was gray and blue-tinned and the grass grew thin, and she thought about her father walking this same ground, making this same observation, pulling out his paper and his pencil and marking it down carefully with his particular compass rose, the notch in the north needle. Why hadn't he told her? She had asked herself that question all day and not found an answer she trusted. Tell no one. Not because he didn't trust her. She believed that. He had trusted her more than he'd trusted most people. Maybe because he loved her more than he trusted the situation. Maybe he'd decided that not knowing was safer for her, at least for a while. Maybe he'd thought the railroad would go another way and the whole thing would become irrelevant. Maybe he'd thought he had more time. People always thought they had more time. She crouched down and pressed her hand against the soil. The ground was cold, dense. It gave nothing, just the weight of it against her palm, the deep particular indifference of earth. Her husband was in ground like this. The thought came without asking, and she let it come, because she'd learned that fighting thoughts was a way of letting them own you. Leland was in ground like this, somewhere on the north side of the churchyard, under the wooden marker she'd had put up because she couldn't yet afford stone. And the land he'd loved and worked and worried about was still here, still under her feet, still carrying whatever it carried under the clay and the roots and the deep, dark years of Texas summer. Still hers. She pressed her hand harder against the soil. I'm keeping it, she thought. Not as a promise to anyone else. As a fact. A simple, flat, determined fact. The way the most important things in a person's life tend to be simple and flat when you finally get them clear. I'm keeping it. She stood up and went inside. She slept 4 hours, maybe 5. She woke at 3:45, and for about 30 seconds she was in the soft suspension between sleeping and knowing, the place where Leland was still alive, and the biggest problem facing her was whether the east pasture was getting enough water. Then the 30 seconds ended. She got up, made coffee, sat at the table. The Colt was where she'd left it. The map was where she'd left it. The letter was where she'd left it. The receipt scrap. She picked it up again and looked at it in the early lamplight. She'd looked at it many times already. Partial name. Partial number. A date. What was left of a name on the top right? Farn. She stopped. Looked at it again. Farn. Farnell. Gibbs Farnell. Her stomach went cold. She sat there very still with the scrap in her hand and the lamp making its small circle of light and the house quiet around her, and she thought about what it meant. The receipt was dated 3 days before Leland died. 250. To someone whose name started with Farn. Gibbs Farnell, who said he'd come because Emmett wired him, who had arrived, conveniently, the day after she opened the box, who had told her things that were useful and plausible and drew her toward trusting him, who was now sleeping in the spare room at the end of the hall. She looked at the wall that separated her from that spare room, looked at the Colt, made herself slow down, made herself think, because here was the other thing. Here was the thing her father had said when she was 15, and had made a very fast judgment about a situation that turned out to be wrong. Evidence isn't what you feel. Evidence is what can be demonstrated. The feeling might be right. The feeling might be completely wrong. But you don't act on feeling. You act on what you can demonstrate. Farn was the beginning of a word. There was more than one word that started with Farn. There were other people in this county whose name might start with Farn. She needed to be sure. She needed to find out without tipping her hand. And she needed to do it quickly, before she did something irreversible based on an incomplete piece of paper. She set the scrap down, picked up her coffee, looked at the map, thought about her father walking these fence lines, thought about Leland, alive and careful and worried, deciding to leave her something instead of nothing, thought about what it cost to trust the wrong person, thought about what it cost to distrust the right one. She had no good answer, but she was going to have to move without good answers. And that was probably what the next several weeks were going to look like. And the only thing she could do about it was keep her eyes open and her finger off the trigger until she knew for certain. She stood up, put her jacket on, checked the Colt, walked out into the cold October morning, where the stars were just beginning to yield to the first gray edge of dawn coming up over the flat land to the east. 8 men were going to be in her yard, 18 hours from now. She didn't know that yet, but she was going to be ready. She was already becoming ready. And the ground under the southwest corner of the Holt farm held its copper patience, 9 months after Leland Holt went into a well he didn't fall into, 9 months after a woman started selling eggs and keeping her head down and folding her grief into something small enough to carry. The patience was running out, on both sides. And West Texas has always known that the thing about patience, the thing about sitting on something and waiting and waiting and waiting, is that it only lasts until it doesn't, and when it stops, when it finally, fully stops. The ground shakes. She didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in the dark with her eyes open, and the Colt on the table beside the lamp and the scrap of paper somewhere behind her eyes, turning and turning and turning. Farn. 4 letters, part of a word, part of a name. Maybe. Probably. But probably was not the same as certainly. And certainly was the only standard she was willing to act on when the alternative was pointing a gun at the wrong man. So she lay there, and she thought, and the house made its sounds around her, the settling and creaking of old wood in cold air, and somewhere down the hall Gibbs Farnell was sleeping the way old men sleep when they've decided something, which is to say deeply and without apparent conscience. Or he was lying awake too. She couldn't know. That was the problem. That was always the problem. You can only know what you can see, and what you can see is always less than what's actually there. Her father had told her that when she was 9 years old. She hadn't understood it then. She understood it now. Down to the bone. 4 in the morning came and went without her noticing. Then 5. Then the light began to change at the east window, that particular gray that isn't dawn yet, but is the announcement of dawn, the sky clearing its throat before it speaks. She got up, dressed, made coffee, and when she heard Farnell moving down the hall, his uneven gait, the sound of a man with a bad knee navigating unfamiliar floors in the dark, she was already at the table, sitting with her hands around her cup, calm, or something that looked enough like calm to pass. He came through the door, stopped, looked at her, looked at the scrap of paper on the table between them, looked at her again. Something moved through his face. Not guilt, not fear, something older than either of those things. The expression of a man who has been waiting for a particular moment and has known it was coming and has not been able to prepare for it adequately, because some moments simply cannot be prepared for. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She didn't put the scrap in front of him right away. She let the silence breathe first, because her father had taught her that too. The person who talks first in a tense silence is the person who can't handle the tension. And she had spent 9 months alone in a quiet house with nothing but her grief and her thinking, and she had gotten very comfortable with silence. She could outlast almost anyone. Farnell picked up the coffee she'd poured for him, drank, set it down, looked at his hands. "How much of the name is there?" he asked. "Enough." He nodded. Like that was the answer he expected. Like he'd done the same arithmetic she'd done, and arrived at the same place. "The money," he said. "I didn't take it to do what they wanted." She waited. "Drury's man came to me 6 months before Leland died." Said Drury wanted to offer me a consulting fee. Said I knew the county, knew the law, could help them set some property questions. He paused. Said $250 to answer some questions about legal options for acquiring land where the owner was resistant. And you took it. I took it. No excuse in his voice, no softening. I asked their questions and I gave them accurate answers about what the law said. I didn't know what they were planning to do with those answers, but you suspected. A long pause. I suspected, he said, and I kept the money anyway. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside a bird. The first one. That single tentative note that means the dark is almost over. 3 days before Leland died, she said. Yes. You didn't go to anyone. You didn't warn him. You didn't go to a marshal or a judge or anyone. No. Why not? He set his cup down. Because I wasn't certain. Because I had suspicion and no evidence. Because Drury had half the county officials in his pocket. And I had a retired badge and a bad knee and nothing that would hold in a court. He stopped, then quieter, and because I was a coward about it. I want to be honest with you. I'm not going to dress it up. She looked at him. This old man, this former lawman, sitting in her kitchen with his white hair and his bad knee and his Winchester in the spare room, telling her that her husband might have lived if he'd been braver. She let that sit. Did not let it become something she could use against him, because that was not what she needed it for. You came here now, she said. Yes. Why? Because Leland is dead and I wasn't certain in time to help him, and I am certain now, and I am not going to make the same mistake twice. His voice had gone flat and hard and very clear. I am also here because your father saved my life in 1871, in a situation I will not describe in detail, and he never collected on that, and I owe him a debt that I cannot pay to him, so I am going to pay it to you. She held his gaze for a long time, looking for the lie in it, not finding one. You understand, she said, that I cannot trust you completely. I would not trust me completely either. And you understand that if you are playing both sides, if there is any piece of this where you are still working for Drury or feeding him information. I understand. Then say it plainly, so I know you know what I mean. He looked at her directly. If I betray you, you will shoot me. And given what I've seen in the last 12 hours, you will do it accurately. She nodded once. Good. She pushed the scrap of paper across the table toward him. Tell me everything you know about what Drury has filed, what he's planning, and what timeline he's working on. And Gibbs Farnell, former U.S. Marshal, told her. It took 2 hours. Some of it she knew. Most of it she didn't. Drury had been filing paperwork for 18 months. Small things. Liens. Notices. The kind of administrative accumulation that looks like nothing until you stand back and see the shape of it. He had a lawyer in Abilene, a man named Cutler, who was skilled at using the machinery of law the way a locksmith uses picks, not breaking in, finding the right pressure points and applying them in the right order until the mechanism yields. There was a note on the Holt deed, a technical deficiency in the original filing. Something about the survey notation, a discrepancy between the 1,862 filing and the county record that had been there for 20 years and meant nothing to anyone, but which Cutler had found and was now using as the basis for a challenge. A challenge that would take how long to resolve? She asked. Months, maybe more. But that's not the point. Farnell wrapped his hands around his cup. The challenge creates uncertainty. Uncertainty makes the land harder to sell, harder to borrow against, harder to defend. And while the challenge is working through the system, Drury has time to keep applying pressure. Financial pressure. Social pressure. A pause. Other kinds of pressure. The kind that puts a man in a well. She didn't say it. He didn't say it. But it sat between them like a third person at the table. The mineral rights, she said. If the land is subject to a legal challenge, what happens to the mineral rights? That's the question, isn't it? He looked at her. Under Texas law, mineral rights are attached to the surface title unless they've been explicitly separated by deed. If Drury wins the title challenge or forces a sale, he gets the copper. But if the mineral rights are established and recorded separately before that happens, Then the surface and the minerals become two different legal questions. Exactly, and it becomes much harder to take both. She looked at the map on the table. Who would need to do that recording? Where? Texas Land Commissioner in Austin. It's a federal mineral claim, technically, because of the railroad involvement. You'd need someone who knows the process, knows the forms, knows who to talk to. She thought about that. I need someone who knows the law, she said. Texas land law specifically. Not a courtroom lawyer. Someone who knows the paperwork, the process. I know someone, Farnell said. She waited. Delia Crane, he said. The school teacher. Her father was Wesley Crane. Practiced law in Abilene for 15 years before he died. Left her every book he owned, and apparently she read all of them. He paused. She's 26, she's smart, and she has no reason to love Amos Drury. He foreclosed on her father's house 2 years ago, and she's been renting a room at the boarding house ever since. Wren considered that. You've already thought about this, she said. I've had some time. How long have you been planning to come here? About 3 months. He met her eyes without flinching. I've been watching Drury and trying to figure out how to move. I needed something to happen that made it necessary. Yes, she absorbed that. So he'd been waiting, watching the pressure build and waiting for the moment it broke through. Was that manipulation? Or was it just the calculus of a man who'd been around long enough to know that timing was everything, and that moving too early was as bad as moving too late? She didn't know. She noted it, filed it away, kept going. Who else? She said. Herschel Pruitt goes by Heck. He's the blacksmith on Crail Street. 61, one arm, built like a wagon. He knows every inch of ground in this county, the water table, the soil composition. If anyone can tell you definitively what's under that southwest corner, it's Heck Pruitt. Is he trustworthy? As a rule, men who work iron for 40 years develop a certain relationship with the truth. It's hard to lie to metal. It either holds or it doesn't. He paused. He also has no patience for Drury. Drury tried to buy his shop twice, and when Heck refused, Drury raised his property tax assessment. A beat. Heck paid it and didn't move. She liked that. Not the part about the tax. The part about didn't move. All right, she said. I need to talk to them both today. Not together. Separately. And I need to do it without anyone who works for Drury noticing what I'm doing. That's going to be difficult, Farnell said. He has people watching. Then we give them something ordinary to watch. She stood up. I'll go into town. Do what I normally do on a Saturday. Buy what I normally buy. And while I'm doing that, I'll find a moment to speak with Crane. Can you get to Pruitt? I can. Without being seen? I know the back way into Crail Street from the east side. He almost smiled. Not quite. I've been getting in and out of towns without being seen for a long time. She picked up the Colt, checked it, put it in the holster under her jacket, the way her father had taught her, close to the body, accessible, but not visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. One more thing, she said. The man who took the money and did what you didn't do. The man who actually she stopped. Controlled something, continued. Do you know who he was? Farnell's expression went very still. I have a name, he said. Tell me. Nestor Page. He watched her face. Drury's bank clerk. Small man. Nervous. Been working at that bank for 4 years and knows every transaction Drury has ever made. She repeated the name in her mind. Said it carefully somewhere she would not lose it. Is he still in Harrow Bend? Last I knew. All right. She picked up her jacket. Let's go. Harrow Bend on a Saturday morning was slightly more alive than on other days, which in practical terms meant maybe 40 more people on the main street and the smell of baking from the Kessler place running stronger in the cool air. She tied her horse at the rail outside Farr's General Store, bought her usual things, flour, salt, lamp oil, the particular thread that Augusto used for mending fence posts. She moved through the routine of it with the surface of her attention, while the deeper part of her was doing other work. She noticed Tasker. He was across the street, leaning against the wall outside the land office, doing the thing men do when they're watching someone, and want to look like they're not, looking slightly past you, slightly unfocused, in the way that is actually more obvious than just looking directly at the thing you're watching. He'd been there when she arrived. He'd still be there when she left. That was fine. She knew he was there. That was an advantage, even if it didn't feel like one. Because attention fixed in one direction is attention not fixed in another. And there were things she needed to do that were not on the main street. She took her goods back to the horse, tied them on, made herself pause, look at nothing in particular, the way you do when you're deciding what to buy next. Then she turned and went to the boarding house on Crail Street. Delia Crane was in the small sitting room, on the first floor, that the boarding house landlady, Mrs. Haggerty, permitted her tenants to use during daylight hours, provided they were quiet about it. She was sitting at the table with 3 books open in front of her and a 4th in her hand, her dark hair pulled back in a way that had started the day tidy, and was now losing the argument with gravity. She was 26 years old and had her father's reading posture, bent forward, slightly left of center, like the words were trying to get away, and she was following them. She looked up when Wren came through the door, and her face did the thing faces do when you recognize that something has shifted. Not just recognition, something more like acknowledgement, like she'd been expecting something, and wasn't surprised it had arrived, only perhaps surprised by the particular form it had taken. "Mrs. Holt," she said. "Miss Crane." Wren closed the door behind her, checked the window to the street. Tasker's angle didn't cover this building. "Good. I'm going to speak plainly because we don't have much time and I think you're someone who prefers that." Delia set the book down. "I am. I need someone who knows Texas land law, specifically mineral rights, under the 1876 statute, specifically how to file a separate claim before a surface title challenge is resolved, and I've been told you might know that." A pause. "Who told you?" "Gibbs Farnell." Something moved across Delia's face. Not surprise, exactly. More like confirmation. "He's here since last night." Delia looked at her books for a moment, then at Wren. "My father handled 3 mineral rights cases in his last 5 years. One of them was a copper claim east of Abilene. I helped him with the filing." She paused. "I know the process. Will you help me? I've been watching what Drury's been doing to this county for 2 years." Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it, something that had been waiting its own time to say something. "He took my father's house 14 months after my father died. Said there was a deficiency in the estate the filing." She looked at the books. There wasn't. He just knew that a 24-year-old woman with no money and no husband wasn't going to fight him in court. "He was right," Wren said. "Yes." Delia met her eyes. "He was right about me then. He miscalculated the timeline." Wren held her gaze. This woman, sitting in a rented room with her dead father's law books, still going, still reading, still becoming something that couldn't be taken in a lien. "What do you need from me?" Delia asked. "Come to the farm today. Bring whatever books you need. I have a map, a letter, and a partial receipt. I need to know if what I have is enough to support a mineral claim filing and what else I might need." Delia was already standing up and pulling books from the table. She left Delia to make her way out of town by the back roads. Safer that way. Fewer eyes, and went back to the main street for the last part of her business. Nestor Page. She'd asked Farnell where he could usually be found on a Saturday. The answer was the saloon. Not the convivial kind of drinking, not the social kind, the solitary kind. The kind where a man sits in the corner with his glass and looks at the wall and is clearly thinking about something he'd rather not be thinking about. The Dusty Rails Saloon was at the north end of Main Street, a low building with a warped sign over the door. She pushed it open at 10:30 in the morning, which was not the usual hour for respectable women in Harrow Bend, and she knew it, and she had decided that was going to have to be all right. There were maybe 7 men inside. She found Page at the corner table without difficulty. He was exactly as Farnell had described. Small, narrow through the shoulders. The kind of man who'd spent his life trying to take up as little space as possible, because space draws attention, and attention, in his experience, led to things being asked of him that he couldn't do. Thinning hair. A suit that was too good for a bank clerk in a town like this, which meant he'd bought it in a better moment and hadn't stopped wearing it. He looked up when she sat down across from him, and flinched. That was the word for it. A small, involuntary, full-body flinch, like something had made a loud sound near him. She said nothing, just looked at him. He looked at his glass. Mrs. Holt, Mr. Page. A long silence. The piano player in the corner was picking through a melody he hadn't fully learned yet, which gave the room a quality of almost music, the ghost of a tune. "I heard about your eggs," Page said, quietly, staring at his glass. "Did you the Boardwalk?" He swallowed. "Tasker. I heard about it. Everyone heard about it." She kept her voice level, conversational. That was the point. He didn't answer. "Mr. Page," she said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as exactly what it is, which is the truth." She waited until he looked at her, which he eventually did, because people eventually looked at you when you stopped talking. "I know what happened to my husband. Not the whole of it, but enough. And I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because I think you've been carrying something very heavy for a long time, and I think you might be looking for a way to put it down." His face, the things that moved across it. Fear first, obviously. The raw animal fear of a man who has done something he cannot undo, and who has lived for 9 months with the knowledge of it sitting on him like a stone. Then something else. Something more complicated and more human. The thing that happens when someone sees you clearly, when someone describes the exact weight you're under and names it correctly. He looked back at his glass. "I signed papers," he said. "That's all." "What papers?" "Employment papers. For a ranch hand." His voice had gone very small. "I didn't ask why they needed a ranch hand. I didn't ask." He stopped. "You knew what you were doing." A long pause. "Yes," he said. And that single word cost him something. She could see it cost him. The way his shoulders shifted, the way his breath changed. Some small piece of the performance of not knowing finally set aside. "I have the receipt," she said. "The one that has your payment on it. I have the date." He went very still. "If that receipt becomes evidence in a legal proceeding," she said, "your name is on it. The nature of the payment is implicit. A prosecutor, a good one, would have no trouble constructing the rest." She paused. "But a receipt is a piece of paper, and a piece of paper is not a witness. What I actually need is a witness." He looked at her. Really looked. For the first time since she'd sat down. "You're asking me to testify," he said. "Not yet. Not publicly. Not today." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you to write down what you know, everything. Dates, names, amounts, instructions. Write it down and sign it. Seal it in an envelope. Give it to someone outside this county to hold, and if I do, then you have leverage. Real leverage. The kind that means Drury can't make a problem of you, because if anything happens to you, that envelope opens and everything in it becomes public." He thought about that. She let him think. The piano player had stopped. The room was quiet except for low talk at the bar and the sound of the wind finding the gap under the front door. "If I testify formally," he said slowly. If it comes to that, yes. I'll need you to testify. Formally. Before a commissioner or a judge." She watched him. "I won't lie to you about what that means. It means putting your name on the record against Amos Drury. It means this town becomes very uncomfortable for you, at least for a while." "At least for a while," he repeated, with a particular flatness that meant he knew what that phrase was doing. "I can't promise you easy," she said. "I can promise you that you'll have done the right thing, which I suspect is something you'd like to be able to say." He looked at his glass for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "Your husband was a decent man." "Yes," she said. "He was. He didn't deserve." He stopped, his jaw worked. "No," she said. "He didn't." Page put his glass down, straightened in his chair, which was a small thing but noticeable. The posture of a man making a decision that his body was already acknowledging. "Give me until tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll write it down tonight. Where should I collect it?" "The church. West door. 7 in the morning." He looked at her. "I'll be there. Or I'll have left it in the hymnal rack under the 3rd pew." She stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Page." He didn't answer. Just picked up his glass again and looked at the wall, thinking about the thing he'd rather not be thinking about. Only now, maybe, it had a shape, and shapes were easier to carry than formlessness. She went back out into the October morning. Heck Pruitt was in the yard when she arrived back at the farm, talking to Farnell with the economical directness of two people who speak a common language without needing to establish it first. He was everything Farnell had described. Big. One arm, the left gone at the shoulder, which he clearly hadn't let become an excuse for anything. The kind of face that had been weathered by decades of standing next to furnaces and had come out harder on the other side. He looked at her when she rode in. She looked at him. "You're the blacksmith," she said. "Last I checked." His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man who only said things he meant, which meant he hadn't said many unnecessary things in his life. "You're Cal Holt's girl." "I'm Cal Holt's daughter," she said. "Wren." A slight inclination of his head. Acknowledgement. "Heck Pruitt. Farnell says you got copper." "I don't know what I've got. That's why I need you." "Then, let's go look at it." He walked the southwest corner for 20 minutes without saying anything. She followed at a slight distance, watching. The way he moved was interesting, attentive, methodical, stopping at particular points, to crouch and look at the soil, to press his one hand against the earth, to look at the way the grass grew, and where it stopped growing the way grass should. He dug a small hole with a folding pick he'd brought in his coat pocket. 6 inches, 8. Looked at what came up, brought a pinch of it close to his face, set it down, moved 20 feet east, did it again. Then he stood up, looked across the land. "It's copper," he said. "Simple. Flat. Not dramatic. The way facts are when they're clear." "How much? I'm not a mining engineer." He looked at the ground. "But I've been smelting iron for 40 years, and I know what metal ore smells like in the soil, and what I'm smelling here is not nothing." He straightened, the bluish cast in the clay, the low grass, that hollow feel underfoot. He looked at her. "There's a deposit. The size of it I can't tell you, but it's real." She looked at the X on the map held in her hand. Her father had stood here. He had stood on this exact patch of ground, years before copper mattered the way it mattered now, before Southern Pacific had routes through West Texas, before any of this was what it was about to become. And he'd crouched the same way. Heck Pruitt had just crouched, and he'd looked at the same pale clay, and he'd understood what it meant. And he'd written down "tell no one" and tucked it away. Because he knew. He knew that some secrets were not safe to carry, and were not safe to share, and were only safe in the place between those two things, which is the place where you put them down and walk away and hope the world changes in ways that make them irrelevant before anyone gets hurt. The world had not cooperated. "I need this confirmed by someone with official credentials," she said. "A geologist. Or a mining surveyor." "There's a man in Abilene," Heck said. "Name of Del Haas. He works contract for the railroad, but he's honest. He'll tell you what he finds." A pause. "He owes me a favor. I can write him a letter." "How long would it take him to get here?" "Right today, he could be here in 4 or 5 days if he moves." She counted in her head what Drury might do in 4 days, what Cutler's legal machinery might accomplish in 4 days. "Write the letter," she said. They were all at the table by evening. Farnell, Delia, Heck, Augusto, who had come in from the yard at some point and stationed himself near the stove in his quiet way, because he understood that this was a meeting that required witnessing. Wren stood at the head of the table. She did not sit, because this was her land and her house, and these were her people, and she was not going to approach any of this from a seated position. "Here's what we have," she said. "And here's what we don't." She laid it out, flat. No drama. The map, the letter, the receipt, what Page had told her, what Farnell had told her, what Delia had found in the law books, what Heck had confirmed about the soil. They listened. No interruptions. Not because she'd asked for none, but because the information was coming in a logical order, and interrupting it would have wasted everyone's time. When she finished, Delia spoke first. "The mineral claim filing can be done in Austin with the land commissioner. I know the form. I know what supporting documentation is required. With what we have, the map, the geological confirmation that Heck can write up, and the deed showing Mrs. Holt's title, we have enough to file." "How long does the filing take to become effective?" "The filing is immediate. The official recording takes 2 to 3 weeks, but the date of filing is what matters legally. Once it's filed, Drury can challenge it. But he can't undo to get to Austin. Yes. How soon? Delia looked at her notes. If we leave day after tomorrow, give Page his day to write his statement, give Heck time to write to Haas, we can carry everything we currently have. The statement from Page would strengthen the case considerably, but isn't strictly necessary for the mineral claim itself. It's necessary for the other part, Farnell said. He said it, the way men say things that everyone knows, and nobody wants to be the first to say directly. Everyone looked at him. The mineral claim protects the land, he said, but it doesn't address what happened to Leland. That's a separate matter, and it's one that Drury will fight differently. He paused. He'll fight the land case with lawyers. He'll fight the criminal case with Cord Vestal, Heck said. The name settled into the room like something dropped from a height. Cord Vestal. She'd heard the name. Everyone in West Texas had heard the name. You didn't work west of Abilene for any length of time without hearing about Cord Vestal. 6 years in the profession of violence for hire. A record that was mostly rumor and partly confirmed fact and entirely the kind of reputation that functions as its own deterrent. Most men who hire men like Vestal don't need to use them, because the existence of them is usually enough. Drury had Vestal. Tell me about Vestal, she said. Farnell and Heck exchanged a look. Quick, Farnell said, accurate. Careful. He doesn't take unnecessary risks and he doesn't make unnecessary enemies. He's professional. A pause, which means if Drury points him at you, he'll do it systematically and he won't hurry. Has he killed women before? A pause longer than she liked. Not that's been proven, Heck said. But there was a situation in Midland 3 years ago. I don't need the details. She looked around the table. What I need to know is whether having Vestal in play changes what we do. It changes the timeline, Farnell said. It means we can't afford to move slowly. We're not moving slowly. She looked at Delia. What do you need tonight to prepare the filing? 2 hours with the map and the deed copy. You have them. She looked at Heck. The letter to Haas. Written by midnight, Farnell. In the morning, I need you to confirm Page's safety. He agreed to write the statement. If Drury somehow got word of our conversation in the salon, I'll check on him first light. She looked at Augusto. He was already looking at her. The farm, she said. I'll stay, he said, simply. No further discussion required. She nodded. All right, she said. 2 days. We get what we need. We file. We build the case, she paused, and we assume that at some point in those 2 days, Drury is going to notice that things are moving. What do we do when that happens? Delia asked. Wren looked at the map at the X in the southwest corner at her father's compass rose. We keep moving, she said. She stayed at the table after the others scattered. Farnell to the spare room, Delia to the sitting room with her notes, Heck out to the barn where Augusto had set up a space for him without being asked. She sat with the lamp and the map and simply looked at her father's handwriting. He had come to this land decades before she had any claim to it. He had stood in the southwest corner and understood what was there. And he had made a choice she didn't entirely understand, to say nothing, to leave it hidden, to put the map in a ledger book and write "Tell no one" on the back. But here was the thing she kept coming back to. He could have destroyed the map. If he wanted no one to ever know, he could have burned it. Burned it and told Douglas Holt to say nothing, and it would have been as if he'd never been in that southwest corner at all. He hadn't burned it. He'd folded it up and tucked it away, and left it in a place where it could be found by the right person at the right time, which meant he knew someone might need it, which meant he was, in his particular silent and complicated way, leaving a door open. For her, she didn't know, she couldn't know, but she was walking through it. The second day began with Page, or the lack of him. She rode into town at 6:50 in the morning, took the long way around to approach from the north and went to the west door of the Harrow Bend Church, which was unlocked, which it always was, because the preacher had said once that he didn't see the sense in locking a building that was supposed to be a refuge, and he'd never changed his mind about it. She went to the third pew, checked the hymnal rack. Nothing. She sat for a moment. The church smelled of candle wax and old wood, And something else underneath both of those, something harder to name, the accumulated weight of people bringing their hard things to a particular place over many years. 7 in the morning. Came no page. 5 passed. She sat very still and made herself be patient and did not let her mind run to the worst explanation, because the worst explanation was not the only explanation. But at 1/4 past, she stood up and went to find Farnell. She found him at the east gate, coming back from town on his bay horse, and she knew from the way he was riding, straight-backed, measured, the particular controlled pace of a man who doesn't want alarm the war person he's riding toward, that something had happened. "Paige," she said before he spoke. "He's alive." Quickly, because he could see on her face that she needed that first. She let out a breath. She said, "He's gone. He left town last night. Mrs. Haggerty at the boarding house says a man came to his room around 9 in the evening. She heard talking, not shouting, just talking. And when she went up in the morning to leave his breakfast, his things were gone." Farnell reined in beside her. He left money on the table for the rent, more than he owed. "Did he leave a statement?" "Not that anyone's found." She turned and rode toward the house without answering. Paige was alive. That was something. Paige was gone. That was something else. The statement she'd hoped to collect was either not written, or written and taken with him, or written and hidden somewhere she didn't know to look. And someone had come to his room last night. Someone who knew he'd talked to her, which meant there had been eyes on her in the saloon, which she'd considered and thought she'd accounted for, which meant she hadn't accounted for it well enough, which meant Drury knew more than she'd hoped. She tied her horse, went inside, and found Delia at the table. "How far along is the filing?" Delia looked up, saw her face. "Finished. I need to review it once more, but it's done. We're leaving for Austin tomorrow, instead of the day after." "What happened?" "Drury knows we're moving." Delia closed the book in front of her. "Precisely. The practiced motion of someone who'd spent years treating books with care, regardless of circumstances. Then we move faster," she said. "Yes." Heck came through the back door, looked at both of them. "Paige is gone," he said. "It wasn't a question." "You heard," Wren said. "Word travels." He moved to the stove, helped himself to coffee with the ease of a man who'd decided he was trusted in this house and was acting accordingly. "There's something else." She waited. "Cord Vestal rode into Harrow Bend this morning. He said it flat. No emphasis. The way you say things that don't need any. Checked into the Harrow Bend Hotel. Signed in and everything." A pause. "That's unusual for a male signing in." "Why would he sign in?" Farnell said. "He'd come through the door behind Heck, because signing in means he's there officially. On record." Heck looked at Wren. "He's not hiding. He wants you to know he's there." She understood that. She didn't like it, but she understood it. Vestal was a message. His presence was the message. Drury was telling her, without saying anything, without doing anything, entirely within whatever passed for law in Harrow Bend, that things were about to escalate, that she had pushed enough, that the next thing that moved was going to move in a direction she wouldn't like. She picked up the Colt, checked it, set it back down. "We leave at 4 in the morning," she said, "before the town is awake. We take the South Road to avoid passing through Main Street." She looked at Farnell. "Can you get us to Abilene safely?" "Yes. From Abilene we take the train to Austin." She looked at Delia. "How long is the filing process, once we're there?" "1 day, if we're seen promptly. 2 at most," she calculated. "Drury can file his challenge in 5 days if he moves immediately. But Cutler is in Abilene, not here, and Drury has to go through him." A pause. "We're still ahead." "Barely," Farnell said. "Barely," she agreed. "But barely is enough." She looked around the room. At Farnell, who owed her father a debt and was paying it the only way left to him. At Delia, who had been waiting for her moment with her father's law books, and her quiet, steady anger. At Heck, who paid his taxes and didn't move, and was here because he'd decided this was the thing to be part of. At Augusto, who was in the yard doing what he always did, because the work was still there regardless of everything else. "Get some sleep," she said. 4 in the morning. At 3:45 she rose, dressed, packed what she needed. The Colt in its holster, the map, kept the letter, the receipt scrap in an oilcloth pouch, one change of clothes. The small amount of money she'd been keeping under the floorboard for 9 months, saving against a need she hadn't been able to define but had been certain was coming. This was the need. She woke Farnell with a knock, heard him moving within seconds. Old Lawman slept light. Delia was already up, her books packed, her notes organized into a leather case. Heck was in the yard with the horses. Augusto was at the gate with a lantern. She stopped beside him. "You don't have to stay," she said. "If things get—" "I stayed for Douglas," he said. "I stayed for Leland." He looked at her steadily. "Stay for you." She didn't have words for it, so she put her hand on his shoulder for a moment, brief, firm, the way her father had expressed things that were too large for talking. And then she mounted up, and they rode south into the dark. 4 of them. One lantern shuddered down to a thread of light, the sound of horses breathing and hooves finding the packed clay of the south road, the cold air, the stars, the farm falling away behind her, still hers, for now still hers. She didn't look back, not because she wasn't afraid of losing it, but because she'd learned that looking back was its own kind of losing, and she had no intention of losing anything. Not this time. Abilene took them a day and a half, not because the road was bad, because they rode careful. No rushing, no straight lines. The kind of travel that's designed to be hard to follow, that makes use of the fact that West Texas has 1,000 ways to get from one place to another, and only some of them are roads. Farnell knew them all, which was what you got after 30 years of moving through this territory, chasing things and being chased. You learned the land the way you learned a language, not just the words, but the idiom, the particular ways it communicated and what it was saying if you were paying attention. She paid attention. She always paid attention. The dust on the south road 3 miles back, probably a rider, probably not following them, probably. The way Vestal had signed into the hotel, ostentatiously, publicly. Drury's methodology, careful, systematic, patient. How long it would take Drury to figure out she'd left town. How long after that before Vestal moved. How long before something broke. They arrived in Abilene at dusk on the second day. Abilene was a different scale than Harrow Bend. Real streets, real buildings. The railroad depot at the south end of town. The cattle yards east of it, the noise and smell and motion of a place that was genuinely large and genuinely busy in a way that a town of 400 people simply wasn't. She felt it before she consciously noticed it, the particular relaxation of being in a crowd. You couldn't watch everyone in Abilene. There were too many of them, which meant no one was specifically watching her. For now, they took rooms at a boarding house 2 blocks from the depot, modest, clean, the kind of place that didn't ask questions, which Farnell had clearly known about because he led them straight to it, without consulting anyone. At the table in Delia's room, she spread the papers, reviewed everything one more time. Delia walked her through the filing document, line by line, what each section established, what the supporting documentation proved, where the gaps were and how they addressed them. There was one gap. One place where what they had was insufficient. The geological confirmation from Del Haas hadn't arrived. Heck had written the letter, but 5 days wasn't long enough. Without Haas's confirmation, Delia said carefully, the mineral claim is based on the map and the visual evidence in the soil. It'll hold for filing purposes. But if Drury challenges it, will the filing date still be protected? Yes. The filing date is the filing date regardless of subsequent challenges. Then we file with what we have. She looked at Delia. We file tomorrow morning, first thing. Delia nodded. Farnell, from the corner of the room where he'd been sitting with his bad knee extended and his Winchester across his lap. There's someone in Abilene you should know about. She looked at him. Wesley Crane practiced law here for 15 years, he said. He glanced at Delia. He had a junior partner in his last few years. Man named Aldous Webb. He went to Austin, works in the land commissioner's office now. A pause. I know him, not well, but well enough. Delia had gone very still. Aldous Webb, she said quietly. Did your father mention him? He talked about him. Once or twice. Something moved in her face. Not quite Odd Grief, the most honest man in Texas law. That's my assessment too. I can. Wren looked at Farnell. Can you wire him tonight? I can. Wire him, she said, and then get some sleep. Tomorrow is a long day. The Austin train left at 7 in the morning. She was on it. They all were. Heck had appeared at the Abilene station that morning, having decided on his own to follow, having ridden through the night, because no one had told him he needed to wait, and Heck Pruitt was not the kind of man who waited when there was something useful he could do. The train moved east through the morning, through the flat land going gradually greener, as the altitude dropped and the scrub gave way to more varied ground, the sky staying wide and high, the way Texas sky does regardless of what the ground beneath it decides to do. She sat by the window, watched the land moving past, thought about Augusto at the farm gate with his lantern, thought about Cord Vestal's signature in the hotel register, thought about Nestor Page wherever he was, carrying his knowledge through whatever town he'd fled to, thought about the southwest corner, the hollow sound underfoot, the blue-gray clay, thought about her father's handwriting, and she realized, somewhere in the rocking motion of the train, somewhere in the sound of the wheels on the track, that this was the thing he'd actually left her, not the map, not the compass rose, not the knowledge of what was in the ground. This particular capacity for sitting in motion and being very quiet and thinking through something very large without panicking, for taking what was overwhelming and making it manageable, for moving one piece at a time and trusting that the pieces would form a shape, he'd left her that. In all those mornings behind the house with the tin cans on the fence rail, in all those long, quiet rides when she was young and he was still alive, and they'd traveled the county together, and he'd talk sometimes and be silent other times, and the silence had been as instructive as the talking. He'd left her this, the capacity to move through hard things, and the knowledge, the flat, unadorned, permanent knowledge that she was worth the moving. Austin in October was different from West Texas in October, bigger, greener, louder. The dome of the state capitol visible from the train station, pale limestone against the blue sky, streets with brick, trees losing their leaves in the warm, slow way that things lost them this far, far south. The land commissioner's office was on Congress Avenue, 3 blocks from the Capitol. They went directly there. She walked through the door first. Behind her, Farnell, Heck, and Delia, carrying her leather case of documents like it was the most natural thing in the world to carry. The man at the front desk looked up, looked at all of them, looked at the leather case. "We're here to file a mineral rights claim," Delia said, before anyone else could speak. Calm, professional, completely certain of herself. The voice of a woman who had read every law book her father owned and was finally in a room where those books were the right currency. "And we have an appointment with Commissioner Webb." She didn't, but she said it with such clarity that the man at the desk nodded and went to check. Wren glanced at her. Delia looked back. Almost a smile, almost. And then the door at the back of the room opened, and a man in his 40s came through. Dark-haired, serious face. The kind of person you trust immediately, because they look like they've never once bothered with pretense. And he looked at them, and then looked specifically at Delia and said, "You're Wesley Crane's daughter." "Yes, sir," Delia said, "I can see it." He extended his hand. "Aldous Webb. Your father was a good man and a better lawyer." He looked at Wren. "And you're the Holt farm." "Wren Holt," she said. "We need to file a mineral claim, and we need to tell you some things about Amos Drury of Harrow Bend." Webb looked at them all, looked at the leather case, looked at Farnell, who he apparently recognized, and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Come in," he said. "All of you. It took 3 hours." Delia presented the filing. Webb reviewed it, asked questions. Delia answered them. Wren answered the ones Delia deferred to her on, which were the ones about the land itself, the history, the specific location of the depression in the southwest corner, the nature of what they'd found and how. Farnell laid out what he knew about Drury's acquisition pattern, the timeline, the correlations. Not accusation, he was too careful for that, but the kind of comprehensive picture that made the shape of something very clear without requiring you to call it by its name. Webb listened, really listened, the kind of listening that takes notes and asks clarifying questions and doesn't jump to conclusions but follows the evidence where it goes. When it was done, he sat back, looked at the table full of documents. "The mineral claim will be filed today," he said. "I'll process it myself. The date of filing is established from this morning." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "The matter of Drury," he said more carefully. "What you're describing, if it can be demonstrated, constitutes fraud, corruption of public process, and quite possibly more serious criminal charges." He paused. "That's not within my authority to prosecute, but I have relationships with people who do have that authority. The Texas Rangers have a captain in Austin, and there's a federal circuit judge who has been interested in railroad-related corruption for some time." He looked at her. "This would take time, and it would require more than what you have here. You'd need testimony." "We may have testimony," she said. "We're working on it," he nodded. "File the claim," she said, "and introduce us to the ranger captain. One thing at a time." He almost smiled. "One thing at a time," he said. She looked at Webb. "File the claim," she said. And he did. They rode back into Harrow Bend at dawn. 4 riders coming in from the South Road, the sky behind them going from black to gray to the particular bruised purple that West Texas does before it decides to become morning. Wren was in front, not because anyone arranged it that way, not because she'd told anyone to fall back, just because that was how it settled, the way things settle when they've found their natural order. Farnell behind her left, Delia behind her right, Heck at the back solid as iron, the way Heck was everywhere he went. 4 days in Austin. The mineral claim was filed. The date of filing was October 14th, 1884, recorded in the Land Commissioner's official ledger, in the handwriting of Aldous Webb himself. Wren Holt, sole claimant. 280 acres, Harrow Bend, West Texas. Mineral rights, copper deposit, southwest quadrant. Filed. Done. Legal. Which meant Amos Drury could challenge the surface title from now until the end of time, could tie it up in courts, could throw Cutler and every lawyer in Abilene at it. But the copper was separate now, recorded separately, filed under a different process with a different office and a different standard of proof. He could not take both. Not anymore. She'd made sure of that. But there was always a but. And this one was waiting for her, in Harrow Bend with his name signed in a hotel register and his gun on his hip, and the specific patient menace of a man who had never once been in a hurry about the way he did his work. Cord Vestal. Still there. She'd asked Farnell, on the road, whether Vestal might have moved on, whether Drury, understanding that the Austin trip had happened, might have pulled him back. Farnell had looked at her with the particular expression of a man who wanted very much to give a more comfortable answer than the truth required. "Drury doesn't pull people back," he said. "Once he sets something in motion, he sees it through. It's how he's operated for 30 years. She'd nodded. She'd expected that answer. Expecting it didn't make it easier, but it made it cleaner. Clear problems were easier than unclear ones. You could prepare for a clear problem. So she had. The farm was intact. That was the first thing she checked when they came through the gate. The barn, the house, the fence lines. Augusto came out of the barn when he heard the horses, and the look on his face when he saw her, relief, simple and unperformed, told her that things had been quiet. Mostly. Vestal rode past, Augusto said. Not dramatic, just factual. Twice yesterday morning, once at midday. Did he stop? No, just rode past. Slow, which meant looking, which meant counting, figuring out who was here and who wasn't, getting the shape of the place. She dismounted. Anything else? Augusto's jaw tightened slightly, which was the Augusto equivalent of considerable agitation. 2 men from the bank came on the second day, he said. Said they had papers, a notice of accelerated repayment. On the loan. What loan? The one on the farm equipment, from 2 years ago. He met her. Eyes. It was paid off in June. I watched Leland pay it. I was standing in the room. She stared at him. They had a document, he said, signed and stamped, showing a balance of $412, still outstanding. There it was, the other jaw of the trap. While she'd been in Austin filing the mineral claim, Drury had been creating a debt that didn't exist, fabricating a lien, building a legal instrument out of nothing but a forged signature and a bank stamp and the accumulated credibility of a man who'd been running Harrow Bend's finances for 20 years. Because if the mineral claim protected the copper, maybe a fabricated debt could still get him the surface. She looked at Farnell. Farnell looked at her. "Page," he said. "Yes, because Nestor Page had been Drury's clerk for 4 years. Nestor Page had processed every transaction that went through that bank, and Nestor Page had left Harrow Bend with whatever he'd written in his room on the night someone knocked on his door, wherever he was, if he was anywhere useful. She went inside. She found the envelope at the kitchen table, just sitting there on the wood. No stamp, no postal mark. Someone had placed it there by hand. Gus had said he'd found it slid under the door that morning before first light, no note attached, and had left it exactly where he found it because he understood that some things required no commentary. Her name on the front. Handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it inside 4 pages, dense, written in a small, careful hand. Dated, signed, notarized, the notary's stamp from a town she didn't recognize, somewhere to the east. Nestor Page. All of it, dated and named and documented in the precise, methodical way of a man who had spent 4 years keeping meticulous records of things he wasn't supposed to notice. The payment to the man who went to the Holt farm the week before Leland died, the fabricated loan notice, the bribe paid to the county surveyor, the conversation between Drury and his lawyer Cutler, which Page had overheard through the wall of Drury's office on a Tuesday in March because the wall was thin, and neither of them had thought about the clerk on the other side of it, all of it. Signed, notarized, and at the bottom, in slightly different ink, like it had been added after the rest, "I am sorry I left without saying. I could not stay. But I could not take this with me either. It belongs with the land. Give it to someone who can use it. N. Page." She sat with it for a long time. Then she looked at Delia. Delia had been reading over her shoulder, silent, professional, her mind already organizing what she was seating. "This is enough," Delia said quietly. "For what?" "For everything." She straightened. "The fabricated debt, the murder, all of it. This, combined with what we filed in Austin, combined with what Farnell can testify to." She paused. "This is enough to take to the Rangers, to a federal judge." Wren looked at the pages. At Page's small, careful handwriting, at the name signed at the bottom of a document that had probably cost the man something significant to write. His job, his home, his particular careful invisibility in a county where powerful men didn't look hard at people who didn't cause them problems. He'd caused a problem. He'd chosen to. She folded the pages carefully. Put them back in the envelope. Put the envelope in the oilcloth pouch with the map and the letter and the receipt. "Get Webb on the wire," she said to Farnell. "Tell him we have Page's statement. Tell him to move on the Ranger captain." Farnell was already standing. "And the judge," he said. "Tell him we need 48 hours." He left. She looked at Delia. "Stay here," she said. "Keep the documents. If anything happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you." Delia met her eyes. "If anything happens to me," Wren said again evenly, "take the pouch to Webb directly. Don't stop anywhere in Harrow Bend." Delia nodded. Once. Precisely. The nod of a woman who understood that this was not dramatics. This was logistics. Wren picked up the colt, walked out into the yard. Vestal was there. She didn't have to look for him. He was at the gate, on his horse, alone, which surprised her. No Tasker, no Drury hands. Just Vestal sitting very still in the early morning light, the way only particular kinds of men can sit still, completely, without fidget, without performance. He was watching her. She walked toward him, 10 feet away, looked at him. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 38, maybe a little more. A face that had been organized by years of outdoor work into something angular and weathered and not exactly hard, more like finished. Like something that had been tested until it reached its final form and wouldn't be changing anymore. He looked at her with the kind of attention that men in his profession develop, total, cataloging, reading the way she stood, the way she held her arms, where her hand was relative to the Colt. She let him read. She had nothing to hide. "Cord Vestal," she said. "Mrs. Holt, a moment. You know why I'm here?" He said, "I do." "Then you know I'm not going to stop." "I know you think that." Something moved in his face. Almost curiosity. Almost. "Drury has a notice of debt," he said. "Signed and recorded. Whatever you filed in Austin is filed and dated." She kept her voice level. "The mineral claim is separate from the surface title, and the debt notice is fabricated." Nestor Page documented everything. A beat. Longer than it should have been. He knew Page had left. He clearly knew. But he hadn't known about the statement. She could see that in the small recalibration his face made. "Page is gone," he said. "His statement isn't." Another beat. Vestal looked at her differently now. Not more carefully, he'd been completely careful from the first second, but differently. The way you look at something when the category you put it in has turned out to be the wrong category. "You know what I do," he said. "I know what you've done," she said. 6 years. I've heard the same things you've heard about yourself. Most of them are probably true." She held his gaze. "But you've never killed a woman on her own front yard in broad daylight with witnesses at the window, and a filed claim in Austin, and a federal judge being wired this morning." The word witnesses did something. "So did federal judge," Drury said. Drury said what he needed to say to keep you working. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. What Drury didn't tell you is that Nestor Page kept records. 4 years of records. Including payments, including instructions. A pause. "Including your name." He was very still. "Not for this job," she said, "for other ones." Page documented everything that moved through that bank. "I don't know what's in there about you specifically, but you might want to think about whether the man who hired you is the man you want to go down with." Something long and complicated moved through Cord Vestal's face. She waited. Let it move. Because her father had taught her that too. There were moments in a confrontation where the worst thing you could do was fill the silence, where the other person needed room to arrive somewhere on their own, where pushing was exactly the wrong action, and stillness was the only useful thing. She stood in the morning light, still, and waited. Vestal looked at the house, at the yard, at the gatepost, at his own hands. "I knew your father," he said. The sentence landed in the air between them. Not a card. Not a manipulation. Just a fact he'd been carrying and had decided to put down. She didn't speak. "Fort Stockton, 1869. He looked at her. "I was 19 years old and very stupid and about to do something that would have gotten me killed. Cal Holt stopped me, not with a gun." A pause. "He talked to me for about 40 minutes, and then one bought me a meal and he told me." He stopped. "What did he tell you?" Vestal looked at the ground. "He told me that being fast didn't make you right." His voice had changed. Something in it that was older than the rest of him, the part of him that had been 19 and stupid and hadn't died. He said fast was a tool. That's all. And tools were only as good as what you used them for. She looked at him. "He taught me," Vestal said. "Not the speed. I had that already. He taught me the rest of it. How to read a situation. How to make the bullet count." How he stopped again. Jaw working. "I went the wrong way anyway." "I know that." "Yes," she said. "No softness in it. But no cruelty either. Just the flat truth." "I wondered," Vestal said, "when I took this job. When Drury told me whose land it was, whose widow." He looked at her. "I wondered if you had his hands." She held his gaze. "Do I?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then something happened that she would think about for a long time after. Cord Vestal reached up with his left hand, unbuckled his gun belt, slowly, deliberately, folded it over the saddle horn, and looked at her. Empty hands. Not surrender. Exactly. Not confession. Something between those two things. Something that didn't have a name because men like Vestal didn't do it often enough for language to have developed around it. "There's a warrant," he said. "For me. Out of Midland. You could use it. I know about Midland." "Then you know I'm not walking away clean." "Nobody walks away clean," she said. "That's not what walking away means." He looked at the gun belt on the saddle horn. At the gate. At her. "Drury's at the bank," he said. "He'll be there until noon." He goes home for lunch at noon every day, hasn't missed it in 3 years. A pause. He doesn't know the Rangers are being wired. She absorbed that. All of what that meant. Go, she said. He looked at her one more time, and she saw it. What he was looking for. The thing he'd come to find out, he found it. He turned his horse, rode south, didn't look back. She watched him go, and thought about her father at Fort Stockton in 1869, buying a meal for a 19-year-old who was about to do something stupid, talking for 40 minutes. Using the particular long patience of a man who believed that people were more than the worst version of themselves, even when the evidence was ambiguous. Cal Holt, who had made her learn to shoot, who had also quietly made her understand what the shooting was for, and what it wasn't for. She turned and walked back toward the house. She went to Harrow Bend at 10 in the morning. Alone. Farnell started to say something when she saddled her horse, and she looked at him once, and he stopped saying it, not because she was cold about it, because she had made a decision and her decisions didn't require explanation. The main street was its usual Saturday self. She rode down it at a walk. People looked. People always looked, she'd noticed, had been noticing for 9 months. The particular way a small town watches its widow. Not unkind, exactly. Just attentive. The way you watch something that reminds you of mortality. Something that could have happened to you and didn't, and the relief of that is so uncomfortable it turns into a kind of staring. She stopped her horse outside the Harrow Bend bank, dismounted, tied the reins, walked through the door. Amos Drury was at his desk. He stood when she came through the door, which told her something. Standing was a power move when you were already powerful. Standing when someone smaller and younger walked into your space was either courtesy or theater, and Amos Drury had no courtesy to spare. Theater, then. He was exactly what she'd built in her imagination from what other people had told her. Medium height. A suit that cost more than most men in Harrow Bend made in a month. Gray hair neatly combed. The face of a man who had organized his expression decades ago into something that communicated prosperity and reasonableness, and had worn it so long he'd probably forgotten there was ever anything underneath it. He looked at her. She looked at him. She thought, this is the man. This is the man who looked at 280 acres of Holt land and decided it was worth a human life. Who sat in this office in this suit with this organized face and made a calculation, a clean, calm, patient calculation, and put a number on it. $250, and handed it to Nestor Page to hand to someone else, and Leland Holt had gone into a well. She stood in the doorway and let herself feel that, fully, the way she hadn't let herself feel it before, because feeling it before would have cost her something she needed for other things. She felt it, and then she put it back. Not away, not buried, just held, the way you hold something that belongs to you permanently, that you're not going to put down, but that you know how to carry without it, stopping you from moving. Mrs. Holt, Drury said. His voice was exactly what she expected. Smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it, because the power he carried did that work, so he didn't have to. This is a surprise. I doubt that, she said. He showed something that was close to a smile. Not quite. I understand you've been to Austin, he said. I have, on business. My business, yes. He came around the desk, not approaching her, positioning himself, the way men do when they want to own the room they're standing in. I'm afraid whatever you may have filed in Austin isn't going to solve your difficulties here. There's the matter of the outstanding loan paid off in June, she said, in this building, in this room, in front of Nestor Page. A pause. Mr. Page has left our employ, Drury said carefully. I know. She looked at him steadily. He left a few other things behind as well. Something moved in Drury's face, the first real thing she'd seen on it. Not fear. Not yet. Something before fear. The thing that happens when a man who has been certain suddenly becomes uncertain. The physical sensation of a foundation shifting. I'm not sure what you think you have, he said. I know exactly what I have. She took a step into the room. I have a mineral rights claim dated and filed in Austin. I have a statement from your former clerk documenting 4 years of your business practices. I have a receipt with your handwriting on it dated 3 days before my husband died. She stopped, and I have a federal judge being contacted this morning by the Texas Land Commissioner's office. He looked at her. The organized face had loosened, not collapsed. Men like Drury didn't collapse. They were too armored for that, too practiced. But loosened. The way a structure loosens when the ground under it moves. This is a bluff, he said. It isn't. You're a woman alone on a piece of land with a fabricated map and a clerk who ran away. I'm a woman with a filed claim, she said, and a signed notarized statement, and a wire that went to Austin 2 hours ago, and a crate full of your own paperwork that Nestor Page kept copies of for 4 years because he was a meticulous record keeper, and he was very, very afraid of you. Silence. The bank was otherwise empty. Drury's staff had apparently found reasons to be elsewhere this particular Saturday morning. Smart people. Drury looked at her for a long time, and she looked back, and she thought, I could hate you. I could hate you very easily. I could let it fill me up the way it wants to, the way it's been wanting to for 9 months, all that accumulated pressure looking for somewhere to go. But that's not what this is. This isn't hate. This is something colder than hate. This is simply the end of your ability to do what you've been doing. You killed my husband, she said. Not loud, not shaking. The flattest, most direct thing she'd said in the entire conversation. Drury said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. There's a Texas Ranger captain in Austin who has been looking for a case against Southern Pacific land corruption for 2 years, she said. He has one now, and you're in the middle of it. She put the oilcloth pouch on the desk between them. He looked at it. Everything Page wrote is in there, she said. Copies. The originals are in Austin. A pause. You can open it if you like. Read what he wrote about you. About Cutler. About the judge you paid in Abilene. She held his gaze. It's a complete picture. He looked at the pouch. At her. At the pouch. And she watched the calculation running behind his eyes. The same calculation he'd been running for 30 years. All those properties, all those liens, all those careful, patient, strategic moves on a chessboard that he'd built himself and stacked in his favor. Running. Hitting a wall. Because the thing about a man who built his power on controlling information was that he had no strategy. For the moment information stopped being controllable. She picked up the pouch, turned, walked toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame, did not turn around. The Rangers will be in Harrow Bend within the week, she said. I'd suggest you speak with a lawyer before then, a real one. Not Cutler. She walked out. The street was the same street it had been 10 minutes ago. Same light, same dust, same 40-odd people going about their Saturday, in the way they went about it. Except, she felt them noticing, not the way they'd noticed before, the widow staring, the uncomfortable sympathy. Something different. She'd walked into that bank and she'd come back out, and something in the way she'd carried herself on the exit was different from the way she'd carried herself on the entrance. And people who live in small towns learn to read those differences the way animals read weather. Dill Tasker was across the street. He was watching her. She looked directly at him. He looked away first, small thing. But it wasn't nothing. She untied her horse, mounted, rode back to the farm. The Rangers came on a Thursday. 4 of them. Captain Jonas Reeves at the front, a man of about 50, who had the look of someone who'd spent 3 decades being professionally skeptical of everything and had developed very good judgment as a result. He read Page's statement in the kitchen. Read the receipts. Read the documents Delia had organized with the thoroughness of a woman who had been waiting her whole adult life to organize documents that mattered. He asked questions. She answered them. He asked Farnell questions. Farnell answered them. When it was done, Reeves sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was apparently something he did when he was compressing a lot of information into a decision. We'll arrest Drury today, he said. And Cutler? Farnell asked. Abilene is outside my immediate jurisdiction, but I have a colleague there who has owed me a professional favor for going on 4 years. He stood. Today. She looked at him. The fabricated debt, she said. The loan notice. Commissioner Webb has already flagged it with the county recorder's office. It's being contested at the state level. You should know there's a process. I know there's a process. He looked at her, almost smiled. Yes, he said, I imagine you do. He put his hat on. Your father served this state with distinction, he said. I hope you know that. He was a complicated man, she said. Reeves looked at her for a moment. The ones worth knowing usually are, he said. And then he went out. She listened to the 4 rangers mounting in the yard. The sound of horses moving with purpose toward town. Then quiet. The particular quiet of a house where something has been resolved. Not finished. Not everything. There would be court proceedings. There would be the long bureaucratic unfolding of consequences. Cutler would hire people. Drury would fight. They always fought, but the claim was filed. The statement was in Austin. And Amos Drury was about to be arrested in his bank by a Texas Ranger captain on a Thursday morning, which was not how he had imagined his day going. She sat at the table. Heck came in from the yard and poured himself coffee without asking, which was still his habit, and at this point she'd simply accepted it. Delia was packing her books with the same precise care she'd arrived with. Farnell was on the porch, Winchester across his knees, watching the road, which was apparently how he was going to spend his retirement now. Watching roads. She'd stopped trying to tell him he didn't need to. Augusto came in from the east pasture. Looked at her. Done? He said. Not entirely. She picked up her coffee. But enough. He nodded. He understood enough. He'd spent his life understanding enough. He went back out to the fence he'd been checking. Because the fence still needed checking. The work was still there. It was always still there. In the days that followed, they left one by one. Delia first. She had books to return to her room and letters to write to the University of Texas in Austin about an application that had been sitting in her father's old desk, unmailed for want of the right moment. She came to say goodbye at the gate, and Wren gave her a handshake that became, briefly and somewhat awkwardly, something more, which neither of them commented on because there were no words for it that were also brief. Heck left on the 3rd day, back to the smithy on Crail Street. He said nothing when he left, which was consistent with everything else about him, and he paused at the gate and looked at the farm. One more time the way people look at things they're deciding to remember. Farnell stayed longest. He sat on the porch for 3 more days, Winchester across his knees, watching the road. She didn't tell him to leave. She didn't tell him he could stay. She left the arrangement to find its own end. On the 4th morning he came to breakfast and ate, and then stood up and said, Sheriff Rawlings has 3 months left in his term, and nobody's running to replace him. She looked at him. Reeves suggested I put my name in, he said. What did you tell him? That I'd think about it. A pause. Think about it here? She said. Thought I might be useful. She looked at him. This old man who owed her father a debt and was paying it the only way left to him. Who had done something wrong 9 months ago and had come back to make it right, and had in his own crooked, limping, complicated way done exactly that. The spare room needs the window fixed, she said. The latch is broken. He nodded. I can fix a latch, he said. Good, she said. He went to fix the latch. November came. Then December. The legal proceedings moved the way legal proceedings move, which is slowly and with irritating interruptions. But they moved. Drury was held over for trial. Cutler lost his license before the trial date. The fabricated debt was formally vacated by the county recorder's office. Del Haas, the mining engineer from Abilene, came in November. He walked the southwest corner for 2 days. When he was done, he sat at her kitchen table and said, in the flat, specific language of a man who dealt in facts, it's a significant deposit. You should not sell the mining rights outright. You should negotiate a percentage of extraction revenue and retain surface control. She had already decided that, but she nodded and thanked him and asked him to put it in writing. He did. The day before Christmas, she rode to the churchyard. Leland's grave, the wooden marker, weathered now. The letters asked to be carved gone slightly softer with months of rain and sun. She stood there for a long time, not talking, not praying, exactly. Just being there, being the person she was now, in the presence of the person he'd been. letting those two things exist in the same space without trying to reconcile them. He'd known something was coming. He'd left her the box. He'd trusted her to figure out the rest. He had been right. She put her hand on the marker for a moment. Then she turned and rode back to the farm. That evening she walked to the southwest corner one last time. Just her. No lamp, no reason beyond the one she was still figuring out how to name. The December sky was cold and enormous and covered in stars. The way this sky always was, the Milky Way laid out like it had nowhere better to be, like it had all the time in the world. She crouched down, pressed her hand against the soil. Cold, dense, the deep particular indifference of Earth that has been here 10,000 years before you and will be here 10,000 years after. She thought about her father making this map, about Douglas Holt building this house, about Leland replacing 3 rails in the south fence after a storm knocked through them 4 summers ago, before either of them knew what was under the southwest corner. She thought about all the mornings her father had stood her behind the house with a Colt and 6 tin cans and said, "Breathe, and get your sight picture, and don't force it, and let the gun find the target." She reached into her coat pocket, brought out the Colt, Cal Holt's Colt, the peacemaker, the weight of it, the worn grip, the specific way it sat in her hand, not like something dangerous, but like something true. The way all tools that have been used well by the right person settle into their proper relationship with the hand that holds them. She held it for a long time, in the dark, under the stars, over the copper, not to carry it forever, not to put it down forever, but to understand finally, completely, the distinction her father had been working toward all those mornings, all those years, the distinction he'd tried to give her with every lesson and every silence and every long ride through this brutal and beautiful country. Not whether you have the skill, whether you choose to use it, and knowing, bone deep, the difference between when it's necessary and when it isn't, the difference between a tool and a definition, between what you can do and what you are. She placed the Colt in its box, closed the lid, held the box in both hands for a moment, then tucked it under her arm and stood up. And in Harrow Bend, they talked about the widow Holt. Oh, they talked. They talked about the bank, about Drury, about the Rangers, and the warrant, and the morning he was walked out of his own building in front of half the town. They talked about the girl who'd sold eggs on Friday mornings and kept her head down for 9 months. And they talked especially about the morning she'd walked into Amos Drury's bank, alone, and walked back out, and untied her horse, and rode away like she hadn't just changed everything. Because she had. She had changed everything. And she hadn't needed to fire a single shot to do it, which was, her father would have said, exactly the point, which was, in the end, always exactly the point. Wren Holt walked back across her own land toward her own house, 280 acres, copper underneath, sky above, enormous and indifferent, and absolutely, stubbornly, permanently beautiful. Augusto was in the yard. He looked at her when she came through the gate, said nothing, just looked, and went back to what he was doing, because the work was still there, and it always would be, and that was not a burden, but a kind of mercy, the particular mercy of work that needs doing, and land that needs tending, and a life that, despite everything, despite all the attempts to diminish it and take it apart and make it small, had held the land held, and Wren Holt was home.